Ms. Flessa, thank you.
Φίλες και φίλοι, καλωσορίσατε στην διαδικτυακή συζήτηση.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the online discussion of the ACS schools in a discussion about the pandemic and the young generation. How ACS school managed to face this uncharted territory that's emerged in our lives during the pandemic. At the end of the day, are we dealing with a generation which shall suffer, or a generation that has a new set of opportunities? I would kindly invite the floor to the president of ACS Athens, Dr. Peggy Pelonis, who shall explain how ACS School managed to face this, let's say, global issue of the pandemic. So, Dr. Peggy Pelonis, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Flessa and everyone on the panel. Good afternoon, good morning. I know everybody's here from different parts of the world, so welcome. And it's a real honor to be here with so many distinguished guests. I wanted to, first of all, say that regarding the learning environment, the online learning environment that we were forced into because of the pandemic, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that any effective learning environment is one that can replicate the learning community virtually. So, you know, the computer becomes a tool. It's not a relationship that the student has with the computer, but it becomes a tool to continue the relationship that they have with their teachers and to engage with their fellow peers. And so in order for this to happen, you really have to have well-designed courses that have both a synchronous and an asynchronous component. And the more familiar the students are with this kind of environment, of course, the better they become at navigating it. It's also very important to train teachers in this kind of learning and teaching, both synchronous and asynchronous. And in fact, I think that the asynchronous component is much more difficult to navigate because, and here, you know, you require the skill of the teacher to come in and really engage students and keep the learning going as they would be doing it in a face-to-face classroom. Of course, all of this requires a very good infrastructure because without good connectivity, none of it would be possible.
Ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω, κυρία Πελώνη, πώς ξεκίνησε η ιδέα?
I'd like to ask you, Ms. Pelonis, how did you start drafting this, let's say, unique book?
Book itself. The book.
Λοιπόν, για το βιβλίο.
The book, is that the question about the book? The book is written by a number of higher education people, as well as 35 of our own faculty members. And they're all telling their stories about online learning and teaching. And they're talking about how they did it in their own areas, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's from the perspective of services, psychology, counseling, whatnot, from the perspective of continuing community service on behalf, you know, of the students and so on and so forth. And the book came about because as a school, we believe in this idea of reflective practitioners. A reflective practitioner is somebody, is an educator who continues to learn. And because the changes are so many and in such multiple levels nowadays, rapid changes, we have to stay abreast of the research, of what's happening in schools, what's happening in higher education, what's happening in the business world. And so we really need to be abreast of these. And so teachers become learners themselves. And in many ways, they role model what the students need to be doing as well. How do you take that information? How do you synthesize it? How do you apply it? And that was what came out in this book when they're each of them are talking about how they did online learning and teaching.
Πιστεύετε ότι αυτός ο τρόπος εκπαιδεύσεως, κυρία
Do you
Πελώνη,
believe that this kind of educational system, this mixed, let's say, system, is here to stay? And how do you think that this blended learning needs to be familiarized to students? What is, in other words, the perspectives of this new technology for young students and young learners?
Yeah, I think that education modalities are expanding and they're making it possible, particularly now with the onset of COVID-19, to educate learners remotely more and more, and to do so with either hybrid models or completely online. And so therefore you develop, more independent, flexible learners. Do I think that this kind of teaching modality is here to stay? I think to some degree it's here to stay. I think students from all over the world can access educational institutions and access, education from many parts of the world without necessarily having to go personally there, or to, it's more cost effective, it's more accessible. And so to a large degree, as technology changes, and if we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and virtual reality in the future, certainly this type of learning to some degree will continue and probably needs to continue in the schools.
Κυρία Πελώνη, εσείς εκτός από πρόεδρος
Dr. Bellonis, aside of your role as president of ACS Athens, you're also a psychologist. So I would like to hear from you. Students, instructors, did they face any particular problems? In other words, do you believe that in this way of teaching, is there an ADD, let's say a new syndrome emerging, an attention deficit disorder, in other words?
I think that different, people respond differently to the online teaching and learning. I think that some students do better online. I think that some students don't do as well online. It depends on the individual student and their individual needs, whether these are learning differences or, other kinds of needs. But I do believe that a well-designed course that has those two components, the synchronous and the asynchronous, can certainly help the learner develop skills where they're, really looking for the resources, looking for the ways to problem solve, looking for how to synthesize this information. So I think that certainly I don't believe that a student should be behind the computer for hours and hours. This I think could create a lot of psychological problems and symptoms as a result. One of the things that I think the pandemic created while we were doing this, besides the idea that, kids were getting jittery and they didn't have the attention span that they, for long periods of time, was also fatigue, lots of fatigue. So after a while, particularly not knowing when this would end and when we would be back face to face, and they had to deal with lack of motivation. They got tired. They sort of gave up on, really being motivated to continue their studies, because it does require a degree of independence as they're learning.
Και τέλος, θα ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω...
And finally, I would like to ask you, what are the advice you would like to share to an ACS student, but also to any given student? What should students be apt to do in the future? What are the challenges ahead? And what should be the, let's say, arsenal that students should have in this new era?
Yeah. I think, first of all, as institutions, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of learners do we want to develop? What kind of people do we want to send out into the world? What kind of skills do we want them to have? Habits of mind and body and spirit. And so if we define that as institutions, then we ask ourselves, what kind of learning then needs to take place in order to develop these kinds of learners? And what kind of teachers or leaders do we need to have in order for this to happen? I think that students nowadays will be required, the situation, the changes, the multiple changes, the rapid changes need a different kind of learner. They need a person, an individual who has different kinds of skills or more amplified skills. For example, they need to be able to master certain skills quickly. They need to develop multiple competencies. They need to be able to sort through abundant amounts of information, to ask critical questions, to be able to decipher the information, to be able to synthesize it, to be able to apply it at a younger age than before, and to do this so that they can improve their life, the life of another, or life on the planet, in order to ensure sustainability. So students, above anything, they need to be inquirers. They need to ask questions, and then figure out ways to problem solve, to find the answers. Some things don't always have answers right away, but through collaboration, figuring out what resources I need to go to. How do I go about this? How do I think about this? I think eventually children get to a place of figuring out the answers. So it really is not just about what's measurable. It's not just about the test. It's not just about the scores. It's about learning to apply things to real life situations that we need to improve, that we need to change, that we need to solve. It's really about turning knowledge into active, conscious citizenship.
Να γίνουν περισσότερο πολίτες. Είναι πολύ εύστοχη η
So
παρατήρηση.
they should be, let's say, citizens, more citizens.
Exactly.
Excellent remark, Dr. Pelonis. Now, I would like to invite to the podium Ms. Panagiotopoulou, General Secretary from the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce and Chairman of the Committee on Education, Innovation and Entrepreneurship.
Και βεβαίως είναι πρόεδρος της Επιτροπής Εκπαιδεύσεως, Καινοτομίας και Επιχειρηματικότητας. Η κυρία Παναγιωτοπούλου.
So, Dr. Panagiotopoulou,
Θα ήταν διαθέσιμη αυτή τη στιγμή να μας μιλήσει και να μας πει
can we hear Ms. Panagiotopoulos?
τα νέα στοιχεία.
Now, taking into consideration the new data, the new information, the rapid changes that we see in the whole environment, and we see how the pandemic played a crucial role to that, could we hear from Ms. Panagiotopoulou what kind of synergies, what kind of collaborations need to be established in order to further develop the synergies between schools and business, so for the students to be well equipped for jobs and careers that, let's say, are not really known up to now. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this kind invitation to be able to participate in this panel discussion about the future of education. I believe it's a highly topical issue, a topical that we're all interested in, not just in Greece, but globally. Allow me to make a minor change. I am former General Secretary of the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce and Chairman, and I am the Treasury of the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce. So my apologies, says Dr. Flessa, because I'm speaking from my telephone and not my PC. So I apologize for any issue. So we all work hard in the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce and the Committee on Education, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. What we just heard are really vital. And these are the things that we also support as Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce. And we should absolutely think about the fact that this magic tool that is internet is in our lives, the lives of our children, our offsprings, because we tend to see that children get a tablet to play with, whether they are 4, 5, or 3 years old, sometimes. And we'll see how Ms. Peloni will confirm that about the ages. They are immersed in the internet. So it is something that is part of their lives. Secondly, previously, when we needed to conduct research, we had to open up encyclopedias, we need to visit libraries. Today, everything is on the internet. So these ages are really used to work in these conditions. And due to the pandemic, we saw that the third generation became more open, more active in these new technologies, and with quite good results. Now, what is important is what is related to, we said earlier, schools. In other words, schools are the ones who need to choose what kind of curriculum they will offer. In other words, when we have a student who during his university years tries to approach a company, a business, and tries to see some career paths, it is rather late. In other words, he should be educated in entrepreneurship. In other words, entrepreneurship should be a course per se. In other words, students in schools should be able to understand what a company is, let's say from 6 years of age. So they need to understand, they need to get to know this philosophy. And when he will enter the university, he will already have a great knowledge and idea about what is businesses and entrepreneurship. Because we have heard a lot of things, and we've heard that companies receive CVs with master's degrees, but they do not have the appropriate skills. And this is also an error on behalf of companies. So we see that they do not have the appropriate time to build the appropriate skills. Multinationals do that. They offer additional skills, soft and hard skills to the staff. So in other words, we see that people are hired with all the appropriate know-how and knowledge and skills, but these skills need to be enhanced. So identifying the appropriate skills take a lot of time. And moreover, we have neglected the fact that lawyers, politicians, engineers, whatever, we also have some, let's say, so-called humble professions, humble jobs. Some schools have closed. So if you talk to the associations of aluminium engineers, there are not technicians who work with aluminium. Whereas we have people with an overinflation of degrees. So this is something that we discuss also with the respective ministries, that if this new initiative starts, companies will have to respond, we have to contribute and have entrepreneurs/professors, businessmen, in other words, who will instruct from a young age students in order to be able to adapt to these new needs and become a new leader, if you wish. So in this new, let's say, demand and need. But allow me to say that we also have the so-called junior achievement. Now, we see that these processes start from the age of, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old. In our country, we are privileged enough. It takes more than 5 years. So we see students exiting high school who have, let's say, a family business. They have the appropriate knowledge and know-how, and they stay at the university, and they do not receive additional skills. So lately, we've seen that there's a greater effort on behalf of universities, and they do collaborate with American universities and with other global universities, and we tend to adapt, and we should be proud of that new change on behalf of Greek universities, because we do have good universities, we have very good professors. So I don't know if I managed to respond to your question. Oh, yes, you did excellently. And I believe you suggested and you proposed an important issue related to education. Let's not wrap up and open the discussion about public schools and technical vocational schools, but in any way, this is not the topic of our discussion. Now, as I have a minor problem, or rather major problem, with my internet connection, and I'm connected via my mobile phone, as far as the questions of the participants are concerned, maybe I could receive this question via SMS. Now, as you talked about the collaboration, Ms. Panagiotopoulou, between American universities and Greek schools, how can we combine this US American philosophy, education philosophy, especially in a period with so many changes. So, and Ms. Peloni could further say, how do you manage at school this, let's say, multinational aspect of schools?
Thank you very much for this important question. First of all, I would like to talk about the political system. About 9 years or about 10 years ago, the Ministry of Education started having direct communication and actually with the core of the US development and learning process, meaning Stanford, Harvard, MIT, etc. And of course, I'm talking about the former Minister of Education, Mrs. Diamantopoulou. She had a plan about what she needed to do and about the changes she wanted to make and how the universities would work internally so that they would change their form. Of course, this American philosophy, which is where we are headed, and the UK is also following, as well as Finland, and we've seen that Finland believes that about schools and kids that less is more, meaning that we need to give kids the opportunity to play and learn at the same time. Then we changed governments and we forgot about the system. Now, again, there is a big effort to further tie this American philosophy and evolution with the Greek universities. And we, as a Hellenic American Chamber and myself in our committee, are working closely with them. And we're also working with the embassy, which is highly supportive of this effort. And we're trying to introduce the American philosophy into Greek universities. But we need to remember that in order to do all that, we need to vote bills and laws. And I'm sorry to say that, but as you can tell, it's not just the desire of the ACS or of the US or of the universities. The point is that all this needs to be embraced and imposed and move forward with it. And remember that officially we should not have English lessons in our public schools, but already the Economic University of Athens offers an MBA program in English, and I know that because I'm on the advisory board ever since it started. There are efforts, but they need to be official, and we all need to know that no matter who's in the government or who's in the opposing parties, we need to know what we want to do and how to move forward with it. In the case of the US, they are all keen and ready to closely work with us. This is what we're trying to do right now and what we're trying to promote and introduce in the curriculums and everything. Mrs. Panagiotopoulos, you talked about Finland, which, if I'm not mistaken, for many years has been the top country concerning its educational system and had the best achieving students all over the world. If I'm not mistaken, in their constitution, the Finns have a provision stipulating that education has to do with all Finnish citizens and not just the government or the people who are in power. So there's another big issue brought about right now, which of course is not to be discussed right now, that education should be completely separated from any political party and should be a completely independent entity, supra partisan, so that it cannot be changed through reforms or changing policies every time a different party takes office. Of course, that's a very large discussion. Yes, it's a very big discussion, which would be worth having at some point. And let me remind you that in Finland, the local authorities, the municipalities, talk with students and schools about the offered lessons. And this is something that is also implemented in the US. I'm sorry for taking up your time. No, that's okay, we have time. Mr. Peloni, could you please explain to us how a school can, your school, which is an international school, can at the same time educate students from different nationalities, which is, I presume, a challenge for the schools of the American community. How do you tackle this challenge as an instructor, as an author, as a psychologist?
Yeah, this certainly is, you know, as a school that has about 65 different nationalities that come together under one roof, this is certainly a challenge, but it's also the beauty of the school. And I think the important thing is to have a vision and to have some common beliefs and a common philosophy. And we unite under that common philosophy. We start with the idea that, you know, of respect for other cultures, for other perspectives, for other nationalities, for other religions, and so on and so forth. And when you start from that premise of respecting those differences, but you come together agreeing that, you know, these are our beliefs, this is our philosophy, and we're all moving towards a common goal. And when you put the student at the center of the institution, so that everything that is being decided, everything that we do, you know, we think with the student's best interest in mind, I think you can't go wrong. And so in a way, you develop your own identity as a school. And I wanted to comment on some of the things that Ms. Panayotopoulou mentioned. I do agree that it's very important. I'm a product of the American educational system. I believe in the American education system. That's where I grew up. But I also think that the Greek education system, and coming from Greek parents, you know, has a lot to offer, and there's always room for growth in both directions. But I do believe that partnerships are very, very important. Whether we're partnering with, you know, higher education institutions, with businesses, with, you know, NGOs, whatever it is, because the point is that the students need to understand how the real world works, and giving them that opportunity at an early age to be able to experience that and to see how what they do in their own little part of the world contributes to a bigger picture, contributes in a good way, contributes in a bad way, or doesn't contribute at all, makes all the difference in terms of turning knowledge and skill into action. So 65 different nationalities come together under one roof because we all start from the premise of respect for differences, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of room to grow, and we have common beliefs.
Σας ευχαριστούμε. Θα ήθελα τέλος να ρωτήσω.
Thank you. Finally, I would like to ask Mrs. Panayotopoulou, before we move forward to the next panel discussion. You mentioned that we should have an entrepreneurship lesson in schools from an early age. And I'd like you to explain to us how you imagine the classroom of the future in the learning environment. Mrs. Panayotopoulou. I think that there's already a transformation in place in the future classroom, because again, thanks to the pandemic, many businesses, even in remote schools of the country, have sent laptops and tablets. So the classroom started to become a little digital. Kids started having laptops and tablets. The future classroom needs to be a classroom without a blackboard and chalk. These things can be found at the historical museum of the school, so that kids know how history has evolved, but they need to have charts, they need to have a digital board, an interactive board, and they need to be introduced to what businesses later will ask from them. So we are talking about a classroom with a physical presence, with a digital online presence, and where everything can be combined in a completely different approach than today. And I think that gradually this is being implemented. And I should also add at this point, as also Dr. Polonis mentioned, about 65 different nationalities, that this is something that is also happening in Greek universities. Because right now there are many people from other countries that come in Greece for their studies, and we see that they speak Greek, and we can't even believe that they speak Greek, but they have actually studied in Greece. And because our professors are all very well educated, they have master's degrees, they have taught in foreign universities, we have started to introduce this culture. So the future classroom will include the physical presence, but it will also be enriched with a hybrid process and technological support and technical support. So maybe we will not have books and things like that, but still we will not ever stop having a paper to take notes and move forward like that. We should not be completely it should not completely forget about books, about notebooks, and about being able to read something on paper, which would not be as effective online on a tablet or on a laptop. And there are many things that are still being printed because younger kids are not able to read so much online. For example, there's a severe lack of information on the financial literacy, especially in Greece. And this is something that we have started trying to inform people ever since their childhood. And the Greek Institute has printed a book for kids. So this cannot be an online, a digital book. I think that it will be a blended situation, but of course we're talking about the next decade. I cannot tell how things will be after this decade. We'll get to this point when we get to it. But I totally agree that the issue of education should be correct, should be structured, should be well structured, and we should include and introduce ideas from countries prevailing in educational issues so that we can make the best out of our situation. Because in our days, there are no borders, there are no limits. No matter what is happening in the US, is happening here as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Marianopoulou. I hope that we get to talk to you again. Let's move to the next panel. And I would also like to ask you to send me the questions via email so that I can open them through my computer. I think that the previous speakers have managed to touch upon the issue of future of education. So let's move on and talk about online teaching. Is it a passing trend or is it a future necessity? In this panel discussion, again, We have the president of the ACS Athens, Dr. Peggy Thelonis, then Dr. Ioannis Miaulis, the president of the Roger Williams University, and Dr. Kevin Ruth, the president of Moreland University. I cannot see all three of you at the same time, so let me start with Dr. Thelonis again. I would like to ask you the following question. We know that, of course, the pandemic obliged universities as well as primary and secondary education learners to be taught online and switch to online modes. Could you describe an effective online learning environment? Of course, it's something that is included in the handbook, which we will see in a moment, but give us some tips, give us some advice.
Just, I think I'm going to kind of reiterate some of the things that I said before, that the best kind of virtual environment is the kind that replicates as best as possible the actual face-to-face learning environment in the classroom. And that means that, you know, we use our computers to be able to engage with other students in the classroom, to be able to engage with our teacher, to be able to have dialogues with our teachers, and so on and so forth, and to be guided to use these effectively. Now, the kind of classroom, that the way that it's designed is most important. So the design of the classroom must, you know, I think include a synchronous and an asynchronous component. And the asynchronous component is the most difficult one to design. And the students are learning, you know, to be effective in both of those components. And that's where the skill of the teacher comes to play. Imagine, I want you to just imagine this. For our school, for the high school and middle school, we were prepared to go online because we had been doing it for a while. So when the pandemic hit, it took us one night and we went online. But for the elementary school, there was no way to prepare for that. Teachers were not prepared. We had no idea that this was going to happen. And so it took a few weeks to train teachers to be able to design effective, you know, classrooms virtually. But think about this, trying to engage young children to be, you know, as engaged as possible online virtually, how difficult that is and what skill that requires in order for that to happen. So you have the design of the classes, is the ability to engage students. And then beyond that, you also had adults on the other side, because little kids can't navigate that environment without the adults. So teachers also had to deal with the adults on the other side who were watching their teaching. So imagine the kind of skill that it takes. And so it takes a certain kind of teacher to be able to say, yes, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to learn new things. I'm going to design it, but I'm also going to figure out a way every day to problem solve and to make this the best learning environment possible.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Να δώσουμε το λόγο στον κύριο Ιωάννη.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Mr. Ioannis Miaulis, who is, if I'm not mistaken, the 11th president of the Roger Williams University and has also been the dean of the College of Engineering at Tufts University and has also been president and director of the Museum of Science in Boston. Mr. Miaulis, you have a great experience in the educational systems, and I would like to ask you how the US universities are tackling these big and multi-level changes in education and in society. Also, the university which you are directing, how is it going to tackle this challenge? Because it seems that this mode of learning is something that's here to stay and will maybe give the opportunity to some students and learners from other countries to attend classes. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, and thank you for including me in this workshop. So online learning has been a component of higher education for many years, and Roger Williams University has had online learning opportunities for students, but we're primarily a residential college. Students come here and live on campus, and they spend 4 years learning in close contact with each other and the faculty. So our urgent shift to online learning that had to be made in March of 2020 accelerated the education of our faculty in offering online courses. A lot of them were very skeptical about online learning, but within 2 weeks, everybody was trained. We spent over $1 million to get equipment for classrooms, and we went online, and then we went on a hybrid mode the following fall semester. There were quite a few positive things. Online learning allowed us to connect with industry leaders, experts, scholars from all over the world, and because distance was always a challenge, and of course, the online version eliminated the distance factor. However, we still believe that a person-to-person education is the way to go. Dialogue with fellow classmates, in-person, hands-on learning, and laboratories and internship is still the future of education.
Σας ευχαριστούμε, κύριε Μιαούλη. Θα ήθελα να εισαγάγουμε στην συζήτησή μας και τον κύριο...
Thank you, Mr. Miaulis. I would like to invite to our discussion another panelist. It's actually Dr. Kevin Ruth, president of Moreland University. Dr. Ruth has an extensive knowledge in comparative literature. He has studied in different universities around the world. He has a, let's say, multimodal and global education. So how these enriched experiences he has acquired through his knowledge, through his experience, can they be replicated? Can they be offered in a so-called online university, in this digital university? We heard that personal contact is important between students and professors. So what is your opinion, Dr. Ruth?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and the opportunity to join this panel. I think Dr. Polonis hit upon the right word a few minutes ago, and that word is design. So in many ways, I think we need to stop thinking about education as teaching only in a one-way method of teaching where the teacher dispenses knowledge to the students. That model has come and gone. There's sometimes a place for it, but as the 100% operating model, I think we've moved away from that, and we have to think about how do we design the learning experience. That could be in a physical classroom. That could be in a virtual classroom. It could be a hybrid. It could be in the city. It could be inside of a museum. It can incorporate any number of elements, but the key is how do we design it? So from our perspective at Moreland University, we have graduates and current students representing almost 160 different countries right now. And we're a graduate school of education. So we focus exclusively on preparing educators for physical and virtual classroom environments. And we prepare them by giving them further subject matter knowledge, as well as how to apply that and design learning experiences around that. We are very intentional about a number of things in our design. One critical element for us is to keep the size of what we call cohorts, very small classes, keep the sizes small. We try to have around 10 people, maybe 12 people in a cohort. And one cohort may have people from 8 or 9 different countries. Within the scope of work of that cohort, it's not just completing a worksheet, scanning it, and sending it back to the instructor. That is ineffective instructional design. We create activities that are collaborative in nature. So it could require 2 or 3 or perhaps more students to work together toward a standards-based item that we then assess based on a rubric of activities. So as Dr. Polonis was saying before, we have to imagine things, reimagine the classroom. We have to look at design, and we have to look at how might we replicate those elements that contribute to success, this can be, how do we advise? How do we interact? So in many ways, it's about replicating the culture of who we are, but it's not about replicating those things that are very antiquated, such as, I'll give you the experience of my own daughter this year, whose history teacher made them download a worksheet to draw the map of Europe by hand, scan it, and send it back. That's identical to being in a physical classroom, and with the tools that are available in the online environment. Why would one do that activity when there are myriad tools available that could show the progression of changing borders in Europe, and then pose much more performance task-based questions around that? So ultimately what it means is anyone who's leading instruction and designing those learning experiences has to be a resource-rich problem solver. There is not just one way to do it. There are multiple ways, but until we know who is in the cohort, we can't fully design all the experiences. So it has to be more iterative, to go to the entrepreneurial piece we were talking about before, more iterative in nature, but still aligned to those things that matter most to us: relationships, meaningful assessment, so that students know how they're doing.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κύριε Ruth. Επανέρχομαι στην κυρία Πελώνη.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruth. Let me turn once again to Dr. Pelonis. Dr. Pelonis, we constantly talk about student skills, and I have a genuine question. What if we talked a bit about instructors, about professors, about teachers? And in other words, what do you believe is the key holder who has the holy grail of this new type of education, let's say? We are dealing with people who will help students be educated in an uncertain new world. So uncertainty is a keyword of today's future. So we feel and we see the pandemic. It is, let's say, inscribed in our bios, in our CVs. So what are your thoughts about the future educator?
I think that the teachers continue to hold the key to education, because the teachers are definitely molding people, particularly in younger grades, K-12 environment. They're developing minds. They're really teaching kids how to use their mind, how to take information, how to sort through it, how to think about it, how to apply it. Certainly, I think that training the mind is about critical thinking. It's about synthesizing information. And so teachers are in the business of people making. And when you're talking about K-12 environments, you definitely need to have partnerships with parents, because young people are watching us, and young people don't necessarily learn always by what we tell them to do, but they learn by watching us and how we do life. And so how do we approach life's challenges? I also think that the key lies with educational institutions, both K-12 and higher educational institutions, because we have to be able to look into the future. Maybe not necessarily 10 years from now, but certainly 2-3 years from now. We have to be able to guide this change. We have to be able to predict these changes. And many times we have to be able to take the risk to move in a particular direction, even if the rest of the world hasn't quite gotten there. So we have to look at the research, we have to look at the educational trends, and we have to be able to guide education in that direction.
Ευχαριστούμε, κυρία Πελώνη. Ο κύριος Μιαούλης.
Thank you, Dr. Pelonis. I'd like to ask from Dr. Miaoulis to give us his insight, his opinion. What are the skills that he believes that students should have in the secondary school, so for them to be able to be, let's say, successful against the future and be successful in their university studies or their postgraduate studies?
Sure. I'm a product of a Greek education, a K-12 system. I went to Athens College, and then I did all my university studies in the United States. And I think we should focus on three things in K-12. First, having students understand and respect the differences in different cultures. When I was in Greece, there were only white white Greeks in my school, and I know that ACS is a much more diverse school, but in general, the students that would go into US colleges or other colleges where there's a lot more diversity than Greece, they should be educated in respecting differences. The second area is the soft skills, communication skills, team working in teams, critical thinking. These are things that at least many years ago when I was in Greece, they were not so much emphasized. There was a lot of emphasis on memorization in school. And I think emphasizing these skills is important. And also rethinking the overall curriculum in K-12 and trying to figure out what's really useful. There are a lot of things that I spent many years learning in my K-12 years in Greece that were absolutely of no use in my college education or my profession. For example, the entire curriculum in science focused on the natural world. And if you look at the world around us, it's mainly human-made. And there was no engineering and technology components in education. So introducing engineering starting in kindergarten as an equal to science would be an obvious positive change. Even revisiting the mathematics curriculum, again, I spent a year and a half learning trigonometry in high school. I have 3 degrees in engineering, and I don't think I have used more than the first 2 weeks of trigonometry that I had in school. However, I had no education in the areas of calculating a mortgage or doing some financial calculations that are essential for everybody's life. So curriculum is the third area.
Σας ευχαριστούμε, κύριε Μιαούλη. Ο κύριος Ruth.
Thank you, Dr. Miaoulis. Dr. Ruth, could you also give us your opinion? In other words, what are the skills that students should have in the so-called K-12 environment against the future needs? Thank you. Dr. Ruth, the floor is yours.
I largely agree with what Dr. Miaoulis said, as well as Dr. Pilonis. In many ways, the content of the curriculum is not important as it once was, the way that it was structured for reasons why it was structured that way at that time. Yet, I think an opportunity for us there is to look at content, and I agree completely about the life skills such as personal finance, mortgage calculations, etc. Again, I'll use my daughter as an example. She's taking this course right now as an online course for the summer. And I said, this will probably be the most useful thing that you've ever taken for the rest of your life. And so far, that seems to be the case. So I think taking content, and again, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, designing learning experiences around that take into account how might we create a team-based activity around this, because this is what the real world is like. You work in teams in order to accomplish projects, get things done. How might we introduce that, and at what time? The soft skills are equally as important. And one thing that's on my mind very much recently, yes, because of the pandemic, but frankly, this was in place before the pandemic, and that is mental health and well-being of young people as they grow up in this world, which is just bombarding them with stimuli. How do we teach them to focus? How do we teach them to, ignore distractions, or at least identify something as a distraction and put it to the side and have the experience of being fully human? And I think that becomes exceedingly important when we look at the advent of technologies that we currently refer to as artificial intelligence, although many computer scientists would say we don't really have AI yet. We have machine learning, which is sort of early stage artificial intelligence. But as that continues to grow, we have to be profoundly human and be able to work with technologies holistically and together. So yes, we hear so much about jobs that exist today will be going away. Well, I don't doubt that there is some veracity or some truth to that. However, I would counter that at the same time, new jobs will be created that are these kind of hybrid opportunities to work together. So rethinking the mathematics curriculum, sure, the engineering side of things and the way of thinking that helps to inculcate. The diversity piece as well is also very important. The teams aspect brings us back into focus. We're not going to be working just in teams with people who look like me, for example, or people who are only monolingual. So we need people who speak 2 or more languages. We need people to be able to work across cultures, recognize cultural differences, and that we approach work differently. Not that one is right and one is wrong. It's just different. How do we create a common objective and work toward that together? That can start in primary and secondary school.
Κύριε Ρουθ, σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Νομίζω ότι στο σπίτι σας έχετε...
Thank you, Dr. Ruth. I guess in your area, you have a psychology laboratory in your house when you refer to your daughter. So, capitalizing on your background, your university studies, do you believe that reinforcing the so-called classical studies, the humanitarian studies, in other words, enhancing them in the university, will this help students to reinforce these skills that are in demand in today's world? Because if we have a student who speaks 2 or 3 languages, but at the same time, he can come across different cultures and reunite these cultures and be, let's say, sustainable. Are we dealing with a Superman or a superwoman today? So how can we achieve that?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think the answer is always in this word: balance, equilibrium, balance. I think to go one way too far is not helpful. For example, if everything were STEM, and I believe in the importance of STEM, but if we don't learn about imagination, we don't learn about how did people handle really complex problems in history. Yes, we have complex problems today, but these have existed for thousands of years. How did people think through things? What lessons can we learn from that? We need context, and we need to say, okay, these were the contextual elements at that time. What are analogous content and context items in our time? How do they fit with the particular problem that we're trying to solve? So we need both in order to be profoundly human. And if I have one worry at the moment, it is the balance of being profoundly human. I hope that we don't lose that in the quest for more and more data and being so data orientated, which there's nothing wrong with data, but I don't want to lose this human side of things. So I think those studies in humanities and liberal arts are key, no matter what one wants to do in life.
Thank you. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για αυτήν την απάντηση ιδιαίτερα. Να περάσουμε στον κύριο Μιαούλη.
Now, let me turn to Dr. Miaoulis, and let's continue talking about artificial intelligence and big data, and how we see how robotics and artificial intelligence evolves. I believe that the term innovation is an overused word and term in the university area and in businesses, and we continue talking that this is the objective of paramount importance. So what is the role of the higher education, Dr. Miaoulis, in order to be able to safeguard that the human factor still remains key? As we see that robotics evolves, artificial intelligence evolves, algorithms evolve, do you believe that any given day that we will have autonomous algorithms? So could we combine your view answer with Dr. Ruth about humanism, about the humanitarian aspect of tomorrow's citizens?
Sure. We have a number of initiatives at the university that focus on preparing the students holistically. We have a requirement where students have to engage in experiential learning, in volunteering in the community, on engaging in civic scholarship, and they learn from foundations, corporations, and non-for-profit organizations that they intern and volunteer, but also they offer their services to these organizations. Also, we have extensive undergraduate research experiences for students. We believe at Roger Williams that students should be engaged along with the faculty in creating new knowledge of all forms, depending on their discipline. And this again is experiential learning, and it involves work in laboratories, in architecture studios, we're right in the ocean, so a lot of our students engage in aquaculture projects, and all these things could not be replaced simply by robotics and artificial intelligence. Also, we emphasize the soft skills, teamwork, collaboration, synthesizing ideas and perspectives, that also the in-person contact is very important.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Και η τελευταία ερώτηση...
Thank you very much. And the last question for this panel, which will be shared for the three of you, but please be brief. Seeing your students, do you think that they struggle? Do you think that there's something that's harder for them? Do you think that there's something they prefer more than something else? What do you do as instructors for the relationship of students towards this new learning environment? Mr. Ruth, please.
I'm trying to make sure that I understand the question entirely. Is it a question about how do students remain connected with each other while learning in different types of environments?
Εάν τα παιδιά σε σχέση με την...
If students compared to live education, online education, have some problems at this point, if there is some difficulty in adapting to this new situation, if they missed something through this process.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so the way that we handle it here at Moreland University, and we're not alone, is universities tend to have robust, we have different terminologies for this, but robust systems that can help. We might call that student success. We call it here candidate support, different mechanisms, but functionally, it is an advisory capacity. So if students are having questions at any time, first and foremost, they go to their instructor as they would if it were a physical classroom environment. They try to sort the problem with that instructor. If the instructor deems that they could use more assistance on something, they'll refer them to candidate support. We even have a learning support specialist in case a student needs any kind of accommodation in order to complete assignments. So we are there with them the entire way through. We have a very robust system in which we are highly proud of, and we know it's one of the critical pillars for our success. Relationships, relationships, relationships.
Thank you very much. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, κύριε Ruth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruth. Mr. Miaouli, could you please answer the same question? I believe that you can elaborate.
Miaouli, μας ακούτε?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. So we have extensive student advising services here at the university, and we are pretty good in customizing the educational experience of the students. So if you go to even to restaurants these days or fast food places, you can customize your sandwich. But if you look at universities, they tend to sort of have one formula for all students. So we spend a lot of time and effort to customize the experience for the students and to support them intellectually and psychologically. We have been very fortunate because of extensive COVID testing and everything to actually be in person for the last year. And we plan to be fully in person, no masks in the fall. So we're turning very fast back to the in-person mode. But again, customization, support, counseling have been very important at Roger Williams.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κύριε Μιαούλη.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miaoulis. Now let's move on to the third panel. Let's look at a more personal dimension of this pandemic generation. Is it a generation that has been traumatized forever, or is it a generation that will be uniquely resilient thanks to the pandemic. Against, we have with us the president of the ACS Athens, Dr. Peggy Pelonis, Dr. Anastasios Stalikas, who is a professor in clinical psychology in the psychology department of the Pantheon University, and Mrs. Tina Stathopoulou, who is an entrepreneur, and she's the mother of a student in the ACS school, Athens. Let's start with Dr. Pelonis, the president of ACS. I'd like to ask you, Dr. Pelonis, as a president and based on your experience, how has your school functioned in this situation? And please let us know if students desired to go back to live learning. We heard what Mr. Ruth and Mr. Miolis had to say about live learning, which is of course a completely different experience from the online mode. But as a psychologist as well, can you tell us what effects this situation with the pandemic had on students? Also, I'm sorry that because I'm getting some calls, I have some delays. Let us know if it is possible to psychologically support students, pupils online, because as we heard from Dr. Ruth and Dr. Miaoulis, this is possible. Please, the floor is yours.
As far as support is concerned, I think that it's possible to replicate the services online as we do the teaching environment. So there was lots of support in terms of psychology, counselors, learning support, and so on and so forth. Of course, and at the same time, it's important to create things like games, create competitions online, celebrations, and all of that. So to replicate the real environment as much as possible. However, I must say that, of course, nothing replaces face-to-face, being face-to-face, because we are beings, and we do need to have that human contact. We do need to, relationships, as Dr. Ruth said, are so very important, and we need to have that community feeling up close. I do want to say that during the pandemic, different people responded differently to the situation. So there were students that did really well online, better than they did face-to-face. There were students, however, that had a hard time with, online, and it took a while to adjust. But imagine that there were these invisible threats to well-being during this whole time that amplified the fears and the anxieties of young people as well as adults. So our psychological immune system was really challenged, was really put to the test during this time. And children, they look to adults. They look to adults to feel safe, to be comforted, to be loved. And, their home is a safe haven oftentimes. But in this case, there was a very intense desire to escape, homes, because they got tired of being at home all the time and being with the same people all the time. And as adults, we're supposed to have all the answers. We're supposed to create these spaces of belonging and feeling safe. And in this case, we didn't have all the answers. We didn't know when the situation was going to end. We didn't know if we were coming back to school or not coming back to school. We were vacillating back and forth for a while. But yet at the same time, we expected children to continue their days without disruption. We expected them to do their homework, to be disciplined, to do as they're told. Oftentimes, maybe we talked about it, maybe we paid attention to it at times, but oftentimes they ignored what was really going on inside in response to this pandemic. And we expected them to just deal with the change and to be resilient. But resilience takes time. It takes time to build. And it's developed as a result of experiences. And it's put to the test when life presents challenges, as it did this time. So when children react to an unnatural situation, we kind of expect them to go back to normal, okay, to not neglect their math homework or their literature homework or whatnot. But in reality, think about the life lessons that they were experiencing, that they were accumulating when they were dealing with this internal conflict, and they really had to find ways to cope. And of course, the environment, the family environment, and the school environment is very important, that we did everything possible to support those coping mechanisms as they develop them. And at the same time as they're watching us trying to cope with a situation that's unknown and oftentimes not having the answer and not knowing what's coming next. Did we lose?
Δεν ξέρω αν μέχρι να επανέλθει η κυρία Φλέσσα θα μπορούσα να σχολιάσω.
Until Ms. Flessa is back, I would like to comment on what Dr. Polani said, because it's very important. And you brought up something that had not been mentioned before, that this is a very difficult situation, that what we experience, we as adults, but also our kids, was a very difficult situation. So it was very important that you mentioned it. Yes, of course, because the fear, the anxiety was not just for our kids, but also for adults. And I would like to ask you, Dr. Selikis, since you are quite well known and you engage in what we call positive psychology, how do you think that positive psychology can help during the pandemic, not just for students, but also for teachers and parents? And how can we see the light at the end of the tunnel? And how can we tackle the future challenges? Because it seems that we will continue to live in uncertainty. Yes, the only certain thing is uncertainty. Thank you for this question. The whole discussion is very interesting, and thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm very glad that I heard the other speakers and learned things about how other instructors think and act. The positive psychology is the most recent field of psychology, and it focuses on what works. We focus on finding our components that can help us be better or be the best versions of ourselves. So in this context, in the pandemic world, which was a very difficult situation, but we were uncertain, the Western civilization seemed to be surprised, because we thought that we had to overcome these issues of pandemics and diseases and stuff like that. But inside this uncertainty, we tried to find our strengths. We tried to find a way to make the best out of it. And this is how positive psychology can help. And this is how it can recognize which components of ourselves can make us more resilient. And let me be more specific. I think that kids did face a big challenge, as we all did. We do not yet know which long-term problems this will cause. We do not know what it means for a 3-year-old, 5-year-old, a 7-year-old to wear a mask and not to be able to see the face of the fellow students. We do not know how it can affect its psychology in the future, but we do know how important relations are. And even though we needed to be physically distanced, we needed to be socially in proximity, in social proximity. It's very important to help each other, to support each other. It's important to keep these relationships alive, whether they are family affairs or relationships, or even friendly relationships between kids, or even the relation between children and their schools, because these relationships empower us. I heard about all you said about how education is changing and how we're moving towards a hybrid model and how we have many different educational components in modern education and how it's not just about learning things. It's what ancient Greeks used to call building citizenship, forming and creating good citizens. All that also mirrors the issues of positive psychology and also highlight the importance of positive psychology because it focuses on characters and personal traits, and it promotes the holistic idea of education and how we can emphasize on building trust, on building help, on building collaboration and critical thinking. And these are things where positive psychology can be implemented, and when it's implemented we see reductions in bullying or in physical abuse. And when kids have close relations and strong relations, they are able to live and experience their school community better, and their life will be further on based on principles and values. I'm not sure if I answered specifically to your question. I could talk about that for days. Yes, I would like to move on to Mrs. Stathopoulou in a bit, but when we come back to you, I'd like you to say what can make us resilient, what else apart from relationships can make us resilient, because indeed this pandemic made us go back to some existential issues in the West. Now I would like to go to Mrs. Stathopoulou. She's an entrepreneur. She is the mother of a pupil at ACS. And as a mother, I would like her to tell us how her child tackled and experienced this situation, and as an entrepreneur, since she has worked with many noteworthy businesses, and how can she, based on her experience, explain if this model can be extended apart from the educational community, but also for the tackling of future challenges, because the pandemic has brought us in front of other future challenges. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I'll talk to you as a mother and then as an entrepreneur, as you said. I have 2 teenage boys, and I like to stress the word teenage because, as you know, during the pandemic, all of us, depending on what kind or what ages of children we had different challenges. There were different challenges for elementary school kids and other for middle school kids, for example. I know that some parents of students in elementary school needed to be parents and teachers at the same time. In our case, it was a bit easier concerning that. There were, of course, challenges, as you said, but I would like to highlight the part of opportunities, because through challenges we also get some opportunities, and this is something we as a family chose to focus on. We needed to adapt to this new reality, and we as a family provide some solutions. I remember during the first lockdown in March 2020, when the government announced that we all had to stay at home, everyone, parents, employees, students, everyone. And I have to say that it was the first time we sat at the table at lunch to eat all together. This is something we only used to do it on vacation. And this is when we told them that we needed to change our daily life, our daily routine. There were some new factors in our lives. We needed to live with each other at home. We needed to have some rules, and we needed to see how we would move forward in this new situation, because of course it was hard for us as parents too, not just for the kids. So the first thing we did was making a series of not rules, but boundaries. We set our boundaries within the house, and these had to do with hours of school and hours of work, hours of physical exercise, and of course hours of gaming for our teenage boys. I think that for us, online education was positive for our kids because they managed to adopt and get used to all the online platforms. And I'll give you an example from yesterday. We were ready to join this panel, and I saw that there were some problems with my computer, many problems actually. And my youngest son came and said, "Why are you stressing over this? You can go on to June, you'll do this, you'll do that." And that's when I realized that these kids absorbed everything and were able to get used to it so easily, and how easy it is for them to find a solution. And this is something that really calmed me down. As Dr. Pilanis mentioned, the ACS was prepared for this transition, but in practice, we saw what we expected and we did not have any difficulties in the platform. And this is something that really calmed us down as parents, because we didn't need to tackle technical challenges as well. Then I also think that kids had to mature. They had to make an effort to succeed on their own without having their parents over their heads or the teachers over their heads, and form their own goals and be able to achieve them, because no matter the age of any child, there's always this comparison between them. And then in order to change our routine, we started walking around, we became tourists in our own city, and we learned many things, us and the kids as well. And we also got to know our children, we got to make conversations, we got to make real conversations that we did not have in our previous reality, because we had to listen to our kids. And we had the time to ask them what they wanted to do, and then achieve what Mr. Stalikas said, and Dr. Ruth, if I'm not mistaken. The mental health of the kids is the most important thing. They need to be pleased with their daily routine, and if they learn to do that right now while they're still young, they will be able to do much more in the future. So as I said, I wanted to focus on the positive aspects of this period. Of course, there were difficulties. It's not just easy. And the most important difficulty, I think, was the social aspect. This was the hardest thing, because our boys are teenage. We can't tell them to just draw on a piece of paper. They needed this context, the communication. They needed to go out. And I think that this was when my kids were actually happy to have each other. This was when they appreciated having a company inside the house. Imagine a parent with just one kid and having to find different activities all day for just one kid. Then there was the issue of coexistence in the house, because we were all in the house 24/7. We needed to find a way to coexist and all four of us be online at the same time. We needed everything to function. And of course, then there were issues like, please don't shout, or dad's on a call, or mom's on the phone. These were all issues we faced. But even then, we tried to see a positive aspect, which is not something we forced. It was something that just came about. And in our conversations, we saw that our kids started talking to us about our jobs and telling us different ideas and different opinions. And they did have wonderful ideas. So in order to answer to your question about challenges and if this is something that will remain, I personally do not think that kids will be that affected by this situation, not that negatively affected. Of course, we will keep being afraid of contracting the virus or transmitting the virus. But I think that if we manage to have a communication, it will be better. And each kid has a different personality and sees things differently. And if he saw me panicked, for sure he would be panicked too. And this is something we need to communicate to our kids, and we need to recognize the difficulties that we went through over this period of time.
As ancient Greek used to say, you refer to the fact that you managed to get back as a family. So there was a positive outcome of this pandemic. So I guess that as we need to wrap up our discussion and let's move forward with Dr. Pelonis, and I see that there is already a question. I managed to read it. So whether we can teach entrepreneurship. So we could probably have an insight from Ms. Panagiotopoulou. Now, Dr. Pelonis, how did students manage, or sorry, professors as a speaker, to continue to be active and be, let's say, focused and interested to, let's say, create this online status, this ideal, if I dare to say, status of producing a book and manage for the school itself to be able to function in a good way?
It was definitely a collaborative effort, and this
Ήταν μια συνεργατική διαδικασία.
So I think a lot had to do with the skill of the teachers. They came together and they worked collaboratively with the administration, of course. They did whatever they needed to be done to create this virtual environment. But in addition to that, the students, one thing, you can always rely on the students to tell you the truth, to tell you exactly what's on their mind. So we often had meetings with students online and asked them, how are you doing? Where are you? What's working? What's not working? Surveys, different kinds of ways to get input from the students as well as the parents. I do want to say here one thing about what Dr. Stalika said earlier. It's really important. We can't build on weaknesses. We can only build on strength. And to be able to focus on the strengths, because certainly there were challenges. Things went wrong, connection problems. There were moments when nobody could connect in the school for a while. And we had to take the time to rethink things, and we had to build our network differently. So it wasn't, I certainly don't want to make it seem like it was a piece of cake across the board. There were challenges and there were issues that came up, but I think the mindset of being able to problem solve and figure it out is what prevailed in this process. And that trickled down to the students, and they in turn also encouraged us to continue in the direction that we were going as well. And of course, the partnership with the parents is very important as well, because if the parents are saying one thing and the educators are saying another, that always, it creates confusion for the students. But in this case, the collaborative efforts is what prevailed in the whole process. And the ability to have that kind of mindset of continuously learning, of continuously problem solving, and focusing on the strengths is what really, I think, got us through and helps us succeed.
Thank you, Dr. Pelonis. Now, is Ms. Panagiotopoulou still in the room, and she could actually give us her insight about this question? Can we indeed teach entrepreneurship to young students? So this question is addressed to Ms. Panagiotopoulou.
Χίλια ευχαριστώ που είμαι μέρος αυτής της... Ακούγεται πολύ η μετάφραση αυτή τη στιγμή.
there's a problem with the sound, says Ms. Panagiotopoulos. I would kindly like to thank you for being part of this process. It has been a really important event because we saw that, let's say, we shared more or less the same opinions, and the crucial points that were referred by all of the speakers are more or less the same. And of course, indeed, entrepreneurship can be taught, and it is already taught. Since September, the Ministry of Education, in almost 300 schools, has introduced a course of entrepreneurship for teenagers. Now, the secret in this process is that teachers should be well informed in advance and acquire the appropriate skills in order to be able to then teach entrepreneurship to young learners. And at this point, myself and the whole team that we work together, we have drafted some proposals for this new way of teaching, the entrepreneurship teaching, that should be supported by entrepreneurs. So we should see entrepreneurs getting into the classroom after, of course, a cohesive evaluation and assessment in order to be able to teach youngsters, young students, young pupils. And I fully agree with Ms. Tathopoulou and, of course, with Dr. Pellonis, beyond any doubt, that students are already merchandisers from any given age, because I encountered some young children at a kiosk of children of 8 years of age, said, "Why will you buy this from this kiosk? You can find in Sklavenitis in a much cheaper price." So they were already entrepreneurs, these young 8-year-old children. So these children are vectors of this new change. And I believe that there are some good steps forward. And of course, with the synergy of all of us, I believe that, yes, entrepreneurship can be taught at school. And as I said, this is a new start. It's a new starting point. Children have ideas, and they know much more things that we know. So I apologize, I need to leave this excellent online panel discussion. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you deeply. We are here to work together, and I sincerely hope that in our new meeting, we will be able to gather face-to-face and discuss about the latest developments about this topic. And of course, we will have a more concrete collaboration with ACS Athens. Thank you. Good luck. Congratulations once again for this excellent book, the K2 Blending Virtual Learning through the I2 Flex Classroom Model book. Thank you, Ms. Panagiotopoulos. Let us continue with the discussion with Mr. Stalikas, Dr. Anastasios Stalikas. We are still in the second panel with Dr. Pellonis, Dr. Stalikas, and Ms. Tathopoulou. Now, when we talk about resilience, can we have this model of collaboration and partnership with companies, between teachers, learners, and companies? This is a new form of collaboration that can be established. And as we have Ms. Tathopoulou, who is a mother of 2 young boys, and some others are also parents. So how can parents address problems that our children face? So how can we, let's say, try to be closer to the needs of our children, and especially in young ages, when we talk about especially adolescence, which is an era of change where children have to face anxiety, stress. So, Dr. Stalikas? Wow, that was a lengthy and rather complex question. I tried to compile everything in a question, Dr. Stalikas, so apologize for that. So I will try to respond in the best possible manner. I'm sure you can going to do that, Dr. Stalikas. So what we refer to in positive psychology is that you should water the seed. So in other words, parents, educators should identify the positive aspects of human beings, and especially of young students. And if we capitalize on these positive aspects, I believe that people can become even better. They become more resilient and they can do things better. Now, the second thing that positive psychology suggests is that your children with love, with affection. So if I see my son and say, oh, how beautiful he is, how intelligent he is, my gazing, my view is much more different than a more, let's say, austere approach. So my even body language against my son creates another aura between us, another mindset. And this mindset is very important. Positive psychology says that pain, when we suffer, when we fail, is human. We cannot avoid failure. Now, whether we will suffer, it is our own personal choice. So we should focus on our positive aspects. We should try to capitalize on these positive aspects. We should try to work on this new relationship. Failures will come. We will suffer at certain moments, but this should not be something permanent. So whether we will suffer or not, Dr. Stalikas, because you said that suffering is part of our DNA, you said that it is our choice. Can you elaborate on that? Because probably over there, there's a second, let's say, key, more specific, related to resilience. I will not refer to some research output, because research suggests that when you have a problem with your back, and I should say that I gave you a placebo, 30 minutes afterwards you say, oh yes, the pain is less. So it's the so-called placebo effect. So it seems that the mindset, the capacity of our brain to be able to approach a problem will not lead to a dramatic, let's say, reaction. The fact that I lost my mobile phone, that somebody stole my wallet, whatever. So this is part of today's suffering. But if I magnify this problem on my mind, and I believe that I should, I don't kill myself for this problem, this is my own prerogative, my own choice. So we should try to create my new reality, to build my own reality. According to research, if we people are happy or not, relies 70% on how you narrate your reality, and only 30% is related to the objective reality that you actually live in. So what we say to ourselves, how we narrate our life to ourselves, plays a crucial role in how positive or negative we are, and how we can mobilize our own internal forces, to be able to succeed. So last but not least, allow me to reiterate the importance of human relations. So we are social human beings and we need other fellow human beings. According to latest research, it seems that when we are not together with other people, our mind is not as active as one might believe. So even brain interactions and cognitive activities demand human interaction. So that's what we need to say to parents, to instructors, to teachers, that all of this learning process is a process interactive, common. It is a process that we need to build on solidarity. So these are the, let's say, skills, if I dare to say, that should be embedded in the learning system. Not just, let's say, talk about mathematics, history, whatever. I need to learn how to collaborate. I need to be generous. I need to help other human beings. I need to be a positive psychology. I need to have a critical thinking. All these notorious soft skills that we referred to earlier. Because I actually referred to the 4 out of 5 pillars of positive psychology that will lead to a better well-being. So we are dealing with the maximizing the aspects of my character. Another important thing is human relations. and mindset. How, as I said, I narrate to myself my own life. If we manage to group all these things, to feed them, let's say, see them as instructors or as parents in my family framework, or as, let's say, CEOs, entrepreneurs in my work environment, well, then these four elements will lead to success. So that's my perception. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. So before moving forward to some questions that were addressed to the chat, let us hear Ms. Dr. Maria Vierinou, who is the director of the e-learning at ACS Athens, the American Community School. So let's hear about the book, K-12 Blending the Virtual Learning Through the I2 Flex Classroom Model. An excellent, actually, work, and I will warmly congratulate you for this book. And I sincerely hope that you will be able to utilize this book, not only the framework of ACS, but also in other schools. So to my knowledge, it can be found in many different libraries, as the Stanford Library. So it is a book which is accessible. So how this initiative actually started and what one can find in this book and how this has enhanced the learning process. Dr. Vierinou.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful panel. So yes, I will give you some background information to the current book. In 2016, the late ACS Athens president, Dr. Yalamas, and myself published as co-editors the first edition of the book called Revolutionizing K-12 Blended Learning Through the iScore Flex Classroom Model. The book was authored by international scholars, but also by ACS Athens faculty. 28 of our faculty participated in authoring chapters, and it presented and discussed research on blended learning in the K-12. Yes, indeed, it has been classified ever since as a core reference material because it has been adopted by various teacher education schools and also academic libraries such as Stanford University Library. And recently we have been told, and we're very happy actually to hear that the book has also been indexed in Scopus, which is a leading indexing database that is preferred by a good number of universities globally. And the criteria, our selection criteria, they are very rigorous, and therefore only reputable publications make it to this index. So now the new book, the Handbook of Research on K-12 Blended and Virtual Learning through the iScore Flex Classroom Model, was edited by Dr. Pelonis, our president, and myself, and initially was invited in 2019 to serve as an enhanced version of the first edition. However, it became a platform for completely new and invited chapters. And in there is a compilation of 35 chapters authored by 13 international scholars and 35 ACS Athens educators. And we have 4 sections, the first 2 discussing the research and trends according to what's going on in the blended learning and virtual learning landscape right now in the K-12. And also the research outcomes that we have through the application of this methodology in ACS classrooms. And then the last part, which is to me is, I guess, the most important one, is Voices from the Trenches, meaning this contains the chapters from our educators. And together with the stories of innovation and leadership, they show that those chapters show not just the what, but also, and the so what rather, but also the now what, which means how this implementation has taken place, what are the learning outcomes for the students, what is the transformation of the faculty, but also of the school in general, and how, in particular, for our educators as authors, both practitioners and authors, operate as agents of change and reflective practitioners.
Ευχαριστούμε, κυρία Βιερινού. Να συνδέσουμε τα όσα μας είπατε.
Thank you, Dr. Vierinou. Allow me to correlate what you said with the message for Dr. that he has in his library the first edition of the book. So We have a question in the chat from our participants, and the question is the following. What were the main challenges that instructors, teachers should overcome in order to be able to move to this online education? So what instructors should actually do? What are the major challenges that instructors had to face?
Okay, can you be more specific? So are you referring to the COVID-19 situation, or in general to us through professional development, trying to help our teachers to change their mindset into becoming blended educators as opposed to just face-to-face educators? I could respond to the first one if you want. Okay, so we have started since 2013 with a lot of sustained systematic professional development, which essentially has been the catalyst in cultivating the teacher's confidence, skills, and knowledge to both design and deliver successful ISQ-Flex learning experiences, which at the same time have not just been research informed. They have been research-based because, as I mentioned, I guess before, and I think Dr. Belonis mentioned that earlier in her talk, we do conduct action research school-wide as part of our accreditation protocol. So it's the professional development with in combination with the action research that has been taking place since 2013 that has essentially transformed the mindset of our educators who have seen ourselves ever since as 21st century educators, and all the different skills that they try to cultivate in their students. They first model themselves. Okay, they're the living examples of those skills, and at the same time they are being supported, inspired, and also empowered to behave as reflective practitioners. So the difficulty is in the mind, less in the technology, less in the how to use the technology, less in the skills. This is the kind of a lesser part of the entire endeavor. If the school is supportive, the way that ACS Athens has been, the leadership, and also the teachers themselves who been advanced thinkers, and they see that, as Dr. Ruth mentioned before, that content is of course important, but skills are even more important for those learners of the 21st century. So they themselves will make will go the extra mile, will make the effort to overcome any tech aspect of the entire enterprise, and they will focus on developing the kind of soft skills of how to teach in a blended way, and then more recently how to teach in a virtual way, in order to be able to both attract and sustain the interest of the student, and teach them in this new medium, as it were, that resonates with them. Because, as Ms. Tathopoulou mentioned before, those students go out from the classroom and they're in their homes, and they are in a technology environment. Okay, so they're called the digital natives, and there is a reason for this, because technology for them is an environment. Okay, it's not something that it's a way, it's very dear to them. So I guess the challenge here that the teachers have is basically to help the students see themselves as learners through technology, not as using technology just for information, for instance, or for entertainment. Thank you.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Να απαντήσει μάλλον η κυρία Πελώνη, θα πρότεινα.
Allow me to give the floor to Dr. Pelonis, if possible, for the following question, which is whether we believe that the hybrid model, the blended learning model that started right from the pandemic, is a necessity, is an opportunity. And allow me to add my own question, if possible. Do you believe that time, and I'm not just addressing the president of the school, but also as a psychologist, Dr. Pelonis, the time that students can have, what is the, let's say, attention time span? Is it the same in the face-to-face and the virtual classroom? So is there, in other words, a time limit that students can be focused on the screen against the focus time span in the face-to-face classroom?
I think that prolonged time on the screen is now, we know that can be pretty detrimental. And so, we definitely don't want students to be in front of a screen all day long, either listening to lectures or doing anything, things related to school, because they're spending time on the screen anyway, doing other things. They're playing games, they're entertaining each other, and so on and so forth. So I think that the attention span is more difficult on the screen, but it can be similar in the classroom. You really need, if you're engaging students, they really need to be doing different things in the classroom. They need to be engaged in different ways. Sometimes they listen to a lecture, sometimes they have hands-on activities, sometimes they collaborate with one another to problem solve, and so on and so forth. So it really needs to move around like the real environment, the world out there when they're going out to play with their friends or look for jobs later on, and so on and so forth. Then that is where the skill lies of the teacher to be able to create that environment and duplicate that on a virtual setting. That's why the synchronous and asynchronous design is so important. And as students become more familiar with this design, and they become more independent and flexible learners, they're able to navigate that design much better the more practice they have. Certainly the status quo is very strong, and it pulls all of us back to what's familiar, to what's comfortable. But I agree with Dr. Guernou that the mindset is the thing that gradually is what needs to change. And the fear is about to change really many times. If you provide the support, if you provide the training, if you provide the professional development and the guidance, people do come and they do really bring their best, put their best foot forward. And they are so incredibly creative in what they're doing with their students. So that's...
Ναι, επίσης ήθελα να μας απαντήσετε, αν μπορείτε, κυρία Πελώνη, και νομίζω στην...
Allow me, Ms. Dr. Pelonis, I have another question about how educators can mentally support the students. Mrs. Talikas could help us that, I don't know. Is there any kind of study? Do you have any data? A contrastive analysis between the pre-COVID era and the post-COVID era? What are the, let's say, what is the success, the achievement of students? Actually, we didn't work. This question to Dr. Pelonis. So whether in school and with your discussion with instructors, have you seen any changes in how students succeed in the classes, in the courses? And how, of course, can we support students? Psychologically, of course, and mentally. In other words, mental health.
Απαντήσετε και μετά να κλείσει η κυρία Πελώνη.
Please answer and then...
Δεν πειράζει. Εντάξει. Ελάτε.
We did see changes. I think the best way to support students in any environment, including the virtual environment, is to really know the student, to really know their strengths, to know their weaknesses, to really be able to tap into the individual student's learning style, and so on and so forth. And again, this is something that, the teachers are well versed to do in the classroom. But in addition to that, yes, we did see differences. There were students that were excelling in the face-to-face environment, and then they didn't do as well on the online, and vice versa. There were students that were not doing as well on face-to-face, and they did very well online. The important thing, though, is the relationship. I come back to what Dr. Kevin Ruth said. The relationship is the most important, and the relationship between the teacher and the student is so important, because when the students know that the teacher cares and really is interested in the individual, in each person, they will listen, and the teacher will be able to tap into, they'll be able to pick up those nuances that tell them, oh, something's wrong here, and we need to redirect We need to spend extra time. We need to, guide them in this area. We need to come together more often, and so on and so forth. And I think that's what Dr. Salika said earlier, that tapping into the strengths. And it's not just the strengths of the individual, but it's the strengths of the relationship between the two. That's what really makes new knowledge. That's what really moves kids forward and moves all of us forward, because trust me, there's so much that we learned from the students this year as well.
Είναι πολύ χρήσιμα τα όσα είπατε, διότι
What you said is very useful, because there are some observations on if we can keep this balance between reality and the virtual environment, because it's like we're talking about two selves. It's like a virtual self and a real self, and we need to keep them in balance. So our psychologist today will answer to us.
Εγώ θα ξεκινήσω ένα βήμα πριν και θα πω ότι το πιο σημαντικό είναι ότι οι εκπαιδευτικοί πρέπει να έχουν την ψυχική τους υγεία. Για να μπορέσουν να στηρίξουν τα παιδιά τους, θα πρέπει αυτοί να είναι καλά. Και ότι θα πρέπει κυρίως... Γιατί ακούω τη μετάφραση, ρε παιδιά? Συγγνώμη.
Okay. So the first step is that instructors need to be mentally healthy. And I think that instructors were tested during this period. It was a very difficult period. They had to do much more things than they did before. And of course, schools, when organized schools were in a better position, they had better platforms. But imagine what happened in the public school system, where we really saw major problems. And so the most important thing is that instructors are mentally healthy and can be able to find the strength to support students and make them resilient. And what does it mean for an instructor to be resilient? How does an instructor narrate his own life? How can he inspire kids through the narration of his own life if he can see himself as someone promoting education and helping kids learn? Then his own inspiration will be transferred to kids. The most inspiring and inspired teachers are those that narrate their own story in a constructive way. When as a teacher say that I help kids become better people, then I'm a better teacher. When I say that we had to choose a job, we had to do something, some people are bakers, I chose to be a teacher, this means that you're not fulfilled through your job and you cannot do it properly. These are the two basic elements for an instructor. And of course, instructors need to be aware and updated on new technologies so that they can introduce technology in the educational life, in life at school. But technology is not a panacea. It's not the solution to everything. It's a very useful tool that can enrich the learning experience and live face-to-face learning experience as well. And when instructors are trained to work in this model, then I think we can provide our pupils and students the ideal educational environment, which will not only make them smarter and more knowledgeable, but it will also make them better citizens. You touched upon the major issue here today, and another major issue is the instructors, because in my opinion, a school is comprised by its instructors, and I would suggest that we close with Dr. Pilonis. We had also invited the Minister of Education, Mrs. Kerames, but she could not make it. So I would like to ask you if there are thoughts or ideas to collaborate with the Ministry of Education, because this valuable handbook that you created would be helpful to reach Greek public schools, because it is a handbook on learning and teaching, which is unique. There is nothing of that kind. So are there any thoughts for collaboration with the Ministry of Education? Because lately we've seen that Greek public school instructors are starting to be trained on things like online learning, and your school could be a model, could provide a model of instruction in this context.
Thank you. Yes, we have, as you heard from Ms. Panagiotopoulou through the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce, we are looking to collaborate. In addition to that, a few people have reached out from the ministry, kind of asking for, how do we do this? And we're available to help in any way possible. Of course, we would be willing to collaborate. Of course, we would be willing to partner. I'm sure there's a lot that we can learn from one another. Absolutely.
Σας ευχαριστούμε θερμά. Θέλω και εγώ να σας
Thank you
ευχαριστώ.
very much. I would like to thank all of you for this honor you made. I learned a lot of things from you today. I hope that you will keep working and you'll keep providing useful results and be innovators in what you do and what you love. Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Have a nice summer.
Bye-bye.